Hello everyone, I'm Jeff Hampton with the Fulgham Law Firm. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Resisting arrest. Is there a way to beat the charge? I want to thank you for joining us today. By the way, if you wait around to the end of our video, I'll also give you a free ebook, What to Do If You Have Been Charged with a Crime in Texas. Now, when we talk about being under arrest, look, getting arrested is one of the most unpleasant things that anyone could experience. Just to be kind of dehumanized, having to put your hands behind your back, hauled off into a police car. But imagine being arrested for something that you didn't do. You know you were innocent. You did nothing wrong, but yet the police are still placing you under arrest. Now, here's the thing. This actually happens all the time. But what tends to happen is someone can get very upset knowing they did nothing wrong, but yet the police are placing them under arrest. And so what they will tend to do is they will attempt to try to stop the officer from arresting them. Be careful. If you ever find yourself in a position where you know that you have done nothing wrong, the worst thing you could possibly do is to attempt to resist that arrest. The officer clearly believes he has a reason to arrest you. So if you start to resist him, what you can find yourself is with a separate new charge of resisting arrest or detention. Now, what if you know you've been wrongfully arrested and maybe you try to talk to the officer, convince the officer, hey, listen, I didn't do anything wrong. But if they proceed forward with it, you need to be polite to the officer. Just follow the orders of the officer. Go ahead and go. If they have to take you to jail and bond out, go through that process. You will then be able to fight your original charge in court and contest that. But I have had a number of instances where there's been clients that didn't do anything wrong, but yet their original charge ends up being thrown out, but they end up having a resisting arrest charge because they were trying to protest the fact they were being arrested. For instance, there was a group of Nacogdoches women in Texas, in the Nacogdoches area, that were together and they were just hanging out. And one of the women in that group she ended up being arrested and she didn't do anything wrong, even though the officers were potentially treating her unfairly. She began to pull back and push back. She ended up being arrested for resisting arrest. And in fact, one of her friends explained that the officer was belligerent to everyone. He was actually violent towards the particular young lady. He was disrespectful and he dehumanized her friend. Despite that, or in spite of all of that, that doesn't seem fair, right? You say, well, that doesn't seem fair. If the police officer charges or treats someone this way, how logical is it that someone should still be facing a resisting arrest charge? Well, here's the reason why. Resisting arrest, unfortunately, is one of the most common misdemeanor charges that you'll find in Tarrant County, particularly in the Tarrant County area, but also in Texas. Many overzealous prosecutors and police officers have a tendency sometimes they want to put this charge on someone. And one example is I'll see someone who is arrested for a public intoxication, right? Maybe they're just leaving a restaurant or a bar. They know they didn't do anything wrong, but the officer says, hey, have you had anything to drink? And the individual says, well, yeah, I had something to drink, but I'm just headed home. I'm about to walk over here to my apartment. The officer says, you know what? I think you're a danger to yourself or others. I'm going to arrest you for public intoxication. Well, the person's upset. They don't want to go to jail and spend the evening in jail. And they say, no, officer, don't do that. Starts to kind of walk away or pull away. Next thing you know, this person who would have been charged with just a Class C misdemeanor of a public intoxication is now facing not only the public intoxication, but now the Class A misdemeanor of resisting arrest. So, and it's a very serious thing because some people say, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's just a misdemeanor. If you find yourself convicted of a resisting arrest charge, if that is on your record, number one, it can affect your ability to obtain a job. You could end up having to pay hefty fines, in fact, up to $4,000 worth. You could end up having to be placed on some type of probation or serve jail time as a result of this type of charge. So I think it's important to understand first, what are some of the regulations for a proper arrest in Texas? So Texas law enforcement officials have a very limited scope when it comes to their authority to place an individual under arrest. One of the things we look at is a police officer must either personally observe a crime or they must have probable cause that they've been able to develop from facts, from individuals, or from evidence on the scene that a person has committed a crime, or the officer must have a warrant for that individual's arrest. So the officers must be able to justify that arrest. So typically it's through some type of tangible evidence that they can hang their hat on. And what I mean by that is an officer can't just walk up to someone and have a mere hunch that they think you're a bad guy or you're doing bad things, so I'm going to just arrest you. That's illegal. It's an illegal arrest. But then police are not allowed to use any excessive force either beyond, this is important, and we'll get into this in a second, police are not allowed to use any excessive force beyond the minimum amount necessary to protect themselves while bringing a suspect into custody. So what happens when those regulations are not being met? When you find the dash cam footage of the example that I gave you about those Nacogdoches women, it revealed that unless the car was stolen, the plainclothes person that approached this poor woman, he was in plain clothes, but he claimed to be a cop, right? Well, she didn't know that. But the footage certainly didn't reveal any crime. All it showed was these women hanging out together, and this woman had no idea that this plainclothes officer was a police officer when he approached her, okay? And that's a defense we're going to discuss here in a few minutes. So let's identify what is resisting arrest. So under Texas Penal Code, section 38.03, it defines resisting arrest as the act of intentionally preventing or obstructing a police officer from conducting an arrest, a search, or transport by using force. So in addition, the individual resisting arrest does not need to be directly under arrest. In other words, you don't even actually have to be under arrest. So impeding someone else's arrest, trying to stop a police officer from arresting someone else, search, or a transportation of that individual can result in resisting arrest charges as well. Now, sometimes you'll find officers that instead of charging them with resisting arrest, they'll charge them with interference with public duties. Separate, different issue, different video for a different day. But the resisting arrest statute is a little vague, though, because when you start looking at it, you'll find many sheriff's departments, many police officers will interpret it very liberally, and they'll come up with a host of activities that require very little resisting or any force to be exerted at all, and they'll still charge somebody with resisting arrest. For example, let's say that an officer comes up behind someone. I've seen this happen so many times. They'll come up behind someone, and they'll grab someone by their arms and pull it back. Well, I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you before, but if someone comes from behind you and pulls your arm and yanks them back, that hurts. And if someone does that, if they pull their arms back in even a small, slight way whenever they're being pulled, sometimes officers will say, "You're resisting arrest. Now I'm going to charge you with it, and you're going to have a separate charge on top of the case that I was bringing against you to begin with." So that's one thing. The other thing is what happens when someone feels like that it's premature, like, "Hold on, officer, let's talk this through," and they start to swing their arm for a second to step away from the handcuff, right? Literally, just the swinging of the arm away for a second to talk to the officer, sometimes the officers will say that is resisting arrest as well. And then, of course, you get with the other one. What happens if you get 2 or 3 officers that start grabbing you? You start feeling a little claustrophobic. You don't know what they're going to do to you. You start kind of shuffling around and moving around a little bit. Sometimes even moving, the officers will characterize that as struggling, and then the next thing you know, you're looking at a resisting arrest charge. So resisting arrest is a Class A misdemeanor under Texas law. A Class A misdemeanor is, yes, it is less serious than a felony charge, but it is still punishable by a maximum of up to 1 year in the county jail and up to a $4,000 fine. Now, there can be aggravating circumstances that can increase the potential punishment. The resisting arrest can actually become a third-degree felony if you have a deadly weapon, if that's utilized at any point during the resisting of the arrest. But one of the things we look at is, are there some defenses? What are the defenses to resisting arrest? Well, remember for a second, let's revisit what has to be proven. Texas law states that a person commits the offense of resisting arrest when they intentionally or knowingly, and that's one of the elements, criminal intent, prevent or obstruct a person known to be a peace officer. In other words, you got to know that they're a police officer, from effecting an arrest of the actor or another by using force against that officer. So one of the things is, number one, here's the misconception. People say an unlawful arrest means I can resist the arrest. No. Anytime someone ever tells that to you, please understand that is not true. If you were unlawfully arrested, it does not mean you can resist that arrest. So that is not a defense. But here are some common defenses that that do make a big difference. Number one, maybe you were unaware that the police officer was in fact a police officer. We actually have this happen quite frequently. We had a client who was in a bar and the music was very loud. He was there and apparently one of the bouncers had called one of the officers to come over and escort him out of the establishment. And he was there having a drink, sitting at the bar, and a man in plain clothes approached him, grabbed him very aggressively on the shoulder, spun him around. And the next thing you know, my guy, of course, is looking at this guy saying, who is this person? Why are they grabbing me? And he begins to resist the entire process. He ends up being charged with resisting arrest, ultimately also charged with assault of a public servant. But he had no idea it was a police officer. If you do not know that the individual is a police officer, then that is a valid defense, okay? It's very much a valid defense. So number one, you were unaware that the police officer was in fact an officer. Number two, what if you were acting in self-defense because the police officer assaulted you? And if the officer is clearly using unlawful force against you, you have the right to resist it. You have a right to push back and literally try to protect yourself. Not only in the ability to protect yourself, but in the process of trying to preserve yourself, you can resist that officer's unlawful actions against you. Finally, what if the police officer did not have probable cause to arrest you for anything? And what we mean by that is not just the arrest, but what if everything that predated the encounter between you and the officer was illegal? If the officer was just acting on a mere hunch, if everything was illegal from the very beginning, then you may have a valid defense of that as well, okay? So these are just a few of the examples that we can point to when we look at the defenses for a resisting arrest charge in Texas. But I want to thank you for joining us here today on our YouTube channel. Listen, maybe you have a case in the North Texas area. Maybe you or a loved one is facing a resisting arrest charge. Don't hesitate to contact the Fulgham Law Firm at 817-877-3030. We'd be happy to give you a free case consultation. And I promised you if you waited around to the end of this video, I would also give you a free ebook, What to Do If You Have Been Charged with a Crime in Texas. Click the link below and we'll be happy to send you over that free ebook. And thanks again for joining us today. If you like what you heard, subscribe to our channel, like our video, and we'll send you more great content just like this. Thanks again for joining us. Take care.